When I stepped out of the black car in front of the glass facade of Grayson Corporation, my heart wasn't pounding with fear. It was beating with anticipation. This day had been 3 years in the making. 3 years of sleepless nights, calculated steps, rejections, hard work, and highs that hid the lows. 3 years to prepare for this moment. The wind of a New York morning coolly caressed my face as I looked at the building where I had once been broken. Here in this very place, I had been told to my face that I would never succeed, that I was nothing without him. Daniel King, my former boss, ex-boyfriend, former god of this company. He, of course, didn't know yet that his world was about to crumble. I straightened my strict gray jacket, took a deep breath, and headed towards the entrance. My stride exuded confidence, not just from the perfectly balanced heels, but from the knowledge that today was not just my first day at work. Today was his last day in power. The security guard at the entrance smiled and politely asked to see my pass. I handed him the plastic card. Junior Executive Director, it read, and this was the first part of my plan. Daniel would see it. He would relax. He would feel like the master of the situation again. But by 10 a.m., everything would change. I entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 47th floor. I knew this floor by heart. Once I worked here as an analyst, but now I didn't need to guess the layout of the offices. I had helped redesign them over the past 2 months. The brass elevator doors closed, reflecting my face. Calm, composed, ready. When I stepped out, the office greeted me with the usual hum of conversations and the muffled clicking of keyboards. A few employees glanced at me furtively. A stranger with a new pass. They were buzzing about the new appointment. I heard snippets of phrases. They say there's a big meeting this morning. The board of directors is up to something. King looks out of sorts since this morning. I smiled slightly and walked to the open workspace where my desk awaited. It was modest, unremarkable, but strategically located opposite Daniel's corner office. I laid out a notebook on the table and took out a pen. Now all that was left was to wait. I didn't have to wait long. What a surprise. The conversations around me hushed. I felt it before I saw him. He stood right in front of me. My name slipped from his lips with the same smug tone I remembered all too well. Avery Carlyle, he drawled, crossing his arms over his chest. His voice was like steel, cool and confident, just like 3 years ago. I slowly raised my gaze. Daniel looked the same as the day he had destroyed me. Piercing blue eyes, smooth-shaven face, a perfectly tailored suit the color of deep charcoal. But unlike me, he hadn't changed. Daniel, I paused as if recalling his name. He smirked. Mr. King, to be precise. But for you, of course, just Daniel. Nice to see you again. Under new circumstances. His gaze slid over my pass. I didn't miss that microsecond when he raised an eyebrow in mockery. Junior Executive Director? Well, everyone has to start somewhere. I hope you can handle it. The requirements here are high. His voice was laced with venom. He thought he was still playing the role of the teacher, and I was still that student who had once left without finishing the lesson. I just nodded. The antique clock on the wall showed 9:15, 45 minutes left. I allowed him to enjoy his illusory triumph. I let him think he still ruled this building. Let him enjoy it, because in 45 minutes, his kingdom would burn to the ground. My phone vibrated, a message from the chairman of the board of directors. Everything is ready. We start at 10 o'clock. Be confident, we're behind you. I took a deep breath, looking at the glass of the office where Daniel sat. He continued to work, unaware that his time was up. 30 minutes left. I glanced at the pass on my table. Soon I wouldn't need to wear it. By lunchtime, he would know who was in charge here. Time dragged on agonizingly slowly. With each passing minute, my anticipation only grew. I sat at my modest desk, carefully flipping through the pages of my notebook. But in reality, I was watching Daniel's every move. He paced around his spacious office, occasionally pausing thoughtfully by the window. He looked relaxed. He thought he had everything under control. He didn't know it was an illusion. 9:30, 30 minutes left. I watched him through the glass. Daniel King, the man who had erased me from his life so easily 3 years ago, as if I were a mere inconvenience. He loved control, and now that control was slipping away from him, even if he didn't realize it yet. I wasn't in a hurry. I was enjoying this. I remembered our last conversation in this company. Back then, I still believed in him, in his strength and confidence. I believed that he truly saw me as a partner. But as it turned out, he saw me as just a shadow, an addition to his life that could be replaced. "You're not made for this world, Avery," his confident voice from back then still echoed in my head. "You're too sensitive. This business, it consumes people like you." But the most painful part was that I had believed him back then. I watched as he dismissed my ideas, as he gave me menial tasks, cornering me. He deliberately diminished my role, as if trying to erase me from the corporate map. And then, when I finally managed to create a project that could have taken the company to a new level, he simply removed me, without explanations, without a chance to defend myself. And now I was here, and it was me who was going to take back what I had lost. I felt his gaze on me. Daniel paused, lifting his head. His lips curled into a slight smirk. He was clearly contemplating whether to approach me again. Perhaps he found it amusing to see me here, in a junior position. He thought I was trying to resurrect my career, that I had come here to beg for a second chance. "Relax, Avery," he said, passing by. "I hold no grudges. Maybe it's even good for you, to start with something simpler." I looked up and regarded him with interest. I didn't need to say anything. I let the silence do the work for me. Let him feel that something was off. Let him wonder why I wasn't responding sarcastically like before. Let him guess. For a moment he hesitated. A hint of uncertainty flickered in his eyes. I noticed how he adjusted his cuffs, an old habit that always betrayed his tension. It was a subtle movement, but I knew what it meant. Daniel wasn't used to his words not eliciting the expected reaction. I just smiled and calmly replied, "I'm glad to see you too, Daniel." He didn't respond. 9:45, 15 minutes left. People began gathering in the conference room. I saw the board members entering the room, their faces maintaining their usual business composure. But I knew they already knew the truth. Daniel also knew something was happening. I saw him having a brief conversation with his secretary. He wanted to be in the loop. He wanted to understand what important announcement the board had prepared. His stern gaze rested on me, but I pretended to be completely absorbed in my work. Then he decided. He headed straight towards me. "Do you know what's going on?" His voice was calm, but I detected tension in it. I pretended to be thoughtfully looking at my laptop, then slowly turned my gaze to him. "You should be in the conference room by 10 o'clock, I replied. He frowned. "Avery, if you know something, I don't—" I leaned in closer and quietly said, "Daniel, sometimes it's best to just wait and see for yourself." This time I saw genuine concern in his eyes. It was fleeting, but I knew. He sensed the threat. 9:58, 2 minutes left. The conference room doors opened. I stood up, took my notebook, and walked past him, leaving him alone with his thoughts. In 2 minutes, his world would begin to crumble. 10 o'clock. The game began. When I entered the conference room, the air was charged with anticipation. The board members sat at the massive dark wood table, papers neatly arranged in front of them. Some of them glanced at me briefly, others continued their restrained conversations. But they were all waiting for one thing, the official announcement that would change the power structure in the company. I took a seat at the edge of the table while Daniel appeared in the doorway. He entered the room with the same confident stride that once made employees bow their heads. His expensive suit fit perfectly, and his usual smirk played on his lips. However, something in his eyes betrayed him. He already suspected that today something was not going according to his script. "Well, I hope this isn't a waste of time," he said, taking his usual seat at the head of the table and giving the chairman of the board a quick glance. "Don't worry, Daniel." The chairman's voice was calm, but there was a hidden steel in it. "We're here to discuss the future of the company and your role in that future." Daniel frowned. He didn't like it when the conversation started this way. "The future of the company? I don't understand what this spectacle is about." He crossed his arms over his chest. "I'm the CEO, or did I miss something?" I paused, then calmly said, "You did miss something, Daniel." He sharply turned his head towards me. His smirk disappeared, replaced by an expression I had been waiting so long to see. He finally felt the threat. The chairman, Mr. Edwards, steepled his fingers and looked at me. "Avery, please explain the situation." I stood up and smoothly walked around the table. The board members watched me attentively. Over the past 2 months, I have been conducting a detailed analysis of the company's financial reports. I opened a folder and laid out documents in front of me, and I discovered some interesting discrepancies. The data presented to the board does not match the actual results. Specifically, investments in innovation are overstated by 17%, while actual revenues are understated to hide growing losses. I heard Daniel exhale sharply, then he leaned forward abruptly. "That's a lie," he hissed, trying to maintain control. "Where's the evidence?" I handed a thin stack of documents to the chairman, then turned on the screen behind me, which already displayed graphs and comparative tables. "All documents are confirmed by an independent audit," I calmly added. "And the most interesting part is that all these discrepancies began to appear precisely at the moment when you took the position of CEO." A grave silence fell over the room. Several board members exchanged furtive glances. Daniel, who was used to controlling the situation, now sat silently, realizing that the ground was slipping away from under him. "This is absurd," Daniel tried to laugh, but his voice faltered. "You can't seriously be taking this. I built this company." "You were destroying it." The chairman folded his hands on the table. "That's why the board of directors has decided to make an immediate change in leadership." This time Daniel couldn't hide his shock. "Change in leadership?" His voice broke. "Are you planning to fire me?" "Not fire," I looked him straight in the eye. "Replace." I saw him pale. His fingers gripped the armrests of his chair, and he quickly looked around, as if seeking support. But there was none. "The board of directors has unanimously voted to appoint Avery Carlisle as Chief Operating Officer," the chairman announced, and his voice was final. My fingers touched the table as I sat down again. I watched Daniel trying to process what had happened. His pride wouldn't let him believe it. He looked at me as if hoping I would say it was a joke. But it was no joke. This was his reality. A minute passed, and he sat motionless, then slowly stood up. "You'll all regret this." His voice was hoarse, angry. "You don't understand what a mistake you're making." But no one answered him. When he turned around and headed for the exit, it seemed to me that his shadow, which once dominated this room, had become tiny. The door closed. Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. Then the chairman nodded to me. "Welcome, Avery," he said with a slight smile. And at that moment I realized the game was over. I had won. When the door closed behind Daniel, a silence hung in the conference room. Not the tense silence that precedes a storm, but a heavy one, filled with the realization that an era had changed. I looked at the people around the table, noting their reactions. Someone tried to hide their satisfaction. Someone looked bewildered. But in every gaze there was one main thing. I was now someone to be reckoned with. "Congratulations, Avery." The chairman, Mr. Edwards, was the first to break the silence. "You're taking on this role at a rather difficult time." I nodded. "I understand, but a crisis is not a reason for inaction, but an opportunity to correct mistakes." Several board members nodded in agreement. I didn't need to say more. I had already proven that I knew what I was doing. "All right," Mr. Edwards slightly smiled. "Let's start with practical steps. We need to develop a strategy to restore the company's reputation after what King did. Financial reports need to be rechecked, and the management team needs to be reviewed." I opened my laptop. Unlike Daniel, I was ready for this day. "I already have a plan," I said calmly. "The first task is an audit. We'll hire an external consulting firm to conduct a full investigation. This will add transparency. The second task is restructuring the team. We need new leaders who genuinely care about the company's future, not personal gain." Mr. Edwards looked at me with interest. "You've thought of everything." "I couldn't afford to make a mistake," I replied, closing the documents. "Too much is at stake." When I left the conference room, the floor was quiet, but the air was filled with tension. Employees glanced at me furtively. Someone whispered. In the news, the first headlines had already appeared. "Grayson Corp. announces a change in leadership. King steps down as CEO. I felt the gazes on me, but I didn't slow my pace. There was no time to lose. When I entered my new office, Amanda, the secretary from the executive department, was waiting for me. She was one of the few who remained loyal to the company's principles, not to Daniel. Miss Carlyle, her voice was steady, but her eyes held respect. You have several urgent meetings scheduled, including with HR and the finance department. I nodded, sitting down at my desk. Prepare all the documents. It's time to act. I thought I had seen Daniel for the last time, but I was wrong. A few hours later, as I was leaving my office, he was standing by the elevator, still in the same expensive suit, but without the same confidence he had in the morning. He looked at me, not with contempt, not with anger, but with that wary expression of someone who finally realized that his era had truly ended. You planned it all, didn't you? His voice was quiet. I met his gaze. I did what I had to do. He nodded slightly, as if only now accepting the inevitable. You know, 3 years ago, I thought you were broken, that you would never come back. I smiled. You were wrong. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside. I watched as the doors closed in front of him, and I knew this was the end, and my present was just beginning. Only a week had passed since I took over this office, but it felt like an eternity. Every day was filled with meetings, reports, decisions that required immediate attention. I was no longer a bystander. Now I ran this place. At 9 a.m., the main hall was filled with key company executives. Many of them had worked under Daniel. Some even helped him hide financial manipulations. But now the situation had changed. They knew it. I entered the hall with a folder in my hands, my gaze sweeping over each of the attendees. They froze, waiting to hear what I would say. Fear, anticipation, curiosity. It was all written on their faces. Good morning. I placed the folder on the table and looked straight at them. As you already know, we are on the brink of change. The old methods no longer work. It's time to reevaluate everything that led us to the current crisis. Silence. I gave them time to absorb my words. Then I continued. From today on, we work differently. Transparency and efficiency will be our main principles. No more shady schemes, no more closed doors. I will personally oversee this. Someone shifted a pen on the table. Someone clenched their fingers. They understood that the era of lawlessness was over. After the meeting, Marcus Davis, the head of the finance department, approached me. He was one of those who had worked side by side with Daniel for years. Avery, he hesitated before speaking. Are you sure that changing everything so abruptly is a good idea? People are used to certain processes. I looked at him without averting my gaze. Being accustomed to chaos doesn't make it the norm, Marcus. The time for change has come, and it will be painful. He slowly nodded, but his eyes held a question. Where was his place in this new structure? No matter how much I wanted to leave him in the past, Daniel's name still echoed in the corridors. Some employees clearly missed his style of management. For them, he was a symbol of stability. Others, on the contrary, felt relief at his departure. But his legacy did not disappear so easily. On my desk lay a report from the internal audit that I had requested immediately after taking office. The new data confirmed the worst fears. Not only falsified reports, but also inflated contracts, inefficient investments, ghost projects that simply siphoned the company's money into nowhere. I ran my finger over the printout. Here it was, King's true legacy. I knew that tough decisions lay ahead. Layoffs, department restructuring, and most importantly, restoring trust. In the evening, when the office began to empty, I stayed in my office, looking at the city through the panoramic window. Grayson Corporation stood on the threshold of a new era, and I was the one who had to open it. My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. You can remove me from the company, but from its history, never. Good luck, Avery. I slowly placed the phone on the table, watching the city lights reflect in the glass. Daniel King had no intention of disappearing so easily. 3 months had passed since the day I took my post. 3 months that changed not only the company, but also me. I stood in front of the panoramic window of my office, watching the city move. Grayson Corp, was no longer the corporation where fear and chaos reigned. Now it was a company with transparent processes, new projects, and a team that believed in change. The results spoke for themselves. Net profit had increased by 25%, employee turnover had halved, and shareholder trust in the management had been restored. We had done incredible work, but there were still many challenges ahead. But one question still bothered me. Daniel King. I knew it had to happen. He couldn't just leave. When I was told he was downstairs, I wasn't surprised. He wanted a meeting. I went down to the meeting room, and he was already waiting there. Still in the same expensive suit, still with the same posture, but now there was something else in his eyes. Recognition, envy, defeat. "You really changed everything, Avery," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I have to admit, I didn't expect this." I crossed my arms. "You didn't come here just to talk, Daniel. What do you want?" He smirked. "I just wanted to make sure you understand one thing. This game never ends. You can win today, but tomorrow someone else will come for you. That's how this world works." I looked him straight in the eye. "The difference is that I build and you destroyed. People stay with me not because they're afraid, but because they believe in what we create. You couldn't understand that." He nodded briefly, and it seemed to me that there was a hint of bitterness in his gaze. Maybe he really did realize that he had lost. "Well, good luck, Avery," he said, standing up. "You deserve it." He left, and I knew that was our last conversation. The next morning, I held another meeting. Now, these were not the tense meetings where everyone waited to be fired. People proposed ideas, argued, discussed, created. I looked at my team and understood. I had done everything right. My phone vibrated. A message from the chairman of the board of directors. "The official statement has been sent. Congratulations, Avery. Grayson Corporation is experiencing a renaissance under your leadership." I smiled, turning off the screen. This was not revenge. This was the beginning of a new era.